The crying started when no one was supposed to be there. Senior Aircraft Inspector Thomas Reeves had been alone in the recovered cockpit section for 40 minutes when he first heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child sobbing from somewhere behind the captain's seat. But Flight 447 had crashed into the Atlantic Ocean 2 years earlier, killing all 228 people aboard, and no child had been registered in the cockpit during the final moments of the flight. My name is Daniel Hartwell, aviation incident investigator with 17 years of experience documenting unexplained occurrences in commercial aviation. What I'm about to share has been officially denied by 3 separate aviation authorities, but the testimony exists in sealed records that few have accessed. This is the story of what happened when recovery teams finally retrieved the cockpit voice recorder from Air France Flight 447 and what Inspector Reeves experienced during the subsequent examination of the wreckage. The recovery operation for Flight 447 was already unusual by any standard. After the Airbus A330 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean on June 1, 2009, it took investigators nearly 2 years to locate and retrieve the crucial black boxes from the ocean floor. The aircraft had disappeared during a flight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, plunging into the ocean with no survivors. For 2 years, the cause remained a mystery as search teams combed an area of ocean roughly the size of Switzerland, working at depths of nearly 4,000 meters. When the flight recorders were finally recovered in May 2011, investigators expected answers, not more questions. The voice recordings revealed a chaotic scene in the cockpit, a series of stall warnings, confusion among the pilots, and the terrible sounds of an aircraft in its final moments. But nothing in those recordings indicated the presence of a child in the cockpit during those final minutes. The passenger manifest confirmed this. No child had been authorized to enter the cockpit during the flight. So when Thomas Reeves, a 30-year veteran of aircraft inspection with the Bureau d'Enquête d'Annonces, reported hearing a child crying while examining the recovered cockpit section in a secured hangar outside Paris, his superiors were immediately skeptical. "I know what I heard," Reeves insisted during his first debriefing, according to documents I've obtained. "It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the wind. It was a child crying, sobbing actually, from somewhere behind the captain's seat. I checked everywhere. There was no one there." Initially, his colleagues assumed Reeves was suffering from stress. The recovery of Flight 447 had been particularly difficult for everyone involved. Bodies had been recovered in various states of decomposition. The psychological toll on recovery teams was immense. Hearing phantom sounds, they reasoned, might be Reeves' mind processing the trauma. But then something happened that couldn't be so easily dismissed. 3 days after Reeves reported hearing the crying, a maintenance technician named Jean Moreau was performing standard documentation procedures on the cockpit wreckage when his audio equipment picked up something extraordinary. He was using sensitive microphones to record ambient sounds as part of standard material stress testing, a process that helps determine how different aircraft components react to pressure changes. What his equipment recorded was the distinct sound of a child's voice saying, in English, "Please help me. I can't find my mommy." The recording lasted exactly 7 seconds before cutting off. When sound engineers analyzed it later, they found no evidence of tampering or external audio sources. The voice appeared to originate from within the cockpit itself, specifically from the area behind the captain's seat, precisely where Reeves had reported hearing the crying. But there was a problem. The cockpit had been submerged in salt water for nearly 2 years. No recording device beyond the hardened flight recorders could have survived such conditions. And yet, somehow, a child's voice had been captured on Moreau's equipment. When confronted with this evidence, BEA officials ordered a complete examination of the passenger manifest for Flight 447. They discovered something peculiar. A 7-year-old girl named Sophie Laurent had been listed as traveling with her mother, but according to seat assignments, the child had never boarded the plane. Her mother, Elise Laurent, was confirmed to have been on the flight, seated in business class, seat 11C. But Sophie's seat, 11D, showed no evidence of occupancy during the flight. Yet multiple passengers had reported seeing a young girl matching Sophie's description during boarding in Rio de Janeiro. How could a child be seen boarding an aircraft but never occupy her assigned seat? And why would her voice be heard in the cockpit 2 years after the crash? The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when recovery teams located Elise Laurent's remains. DNA testing confirmed her identity, but despite extensive recovery efforts, no remains matching Sophie Laurent's DNA profile were ever found. It was as if the child had simply vanished. The BA formed a special investigative unit to determine what had happened to Sophie Laurent. They interviewed airport staff in Rio, examined security footage, and spoke with the family members of other passengers. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Security footage clearly showed Elise Laurent passing through the boarding gate in Rio, holding the hand of a young girl matching Sophie's description. Both mother and daughter had their boarding passes scanned. There was no question that Sophie had boarded Flight 447, yet no trace of her was found in the wreckage. Officials initially suspected that perhaps Sophie's body had been consumed by marine life or carried away by ocean currents. But this theory failed to explain the voice in the cockpit 2 years later, and it certainly didn't explain what happened next. 2 weeks after Moreau's recording, Inspector Reeves requested permission to conduct a night examination of the cockpit wreckage. Such requests were unusual but not unprecedented. Sometimes, inspectors believed different lighting conditions might reveal damage patterns not visible during daytime examinations. His request was approved, and at 11:45 p.m. on June 7, 2011, Reeves entered the secure hangar alone. According to the security logs, Reeves spent approximately 3 hours in the hangar. The security cameras show him carefully examining various sections of the cockpit, taking notes, and occasionally speaking into a handheld recorder. At 2:17 a.m., something changed. The security footage shows Reeves suddenly looking up, as if startled. He turns toward the captain's seat, then appears to speak to someone not visible on the camera. For the next 20 minutes, the footage shows Reeves moving around the cockpit, appearing increasingly agitated. At one point, he kneels down and reaches towards something behind the captain's seat. His lips are moving, but there is no audio on the security footage. At 2:39 a.m., Reeves abruptly stands up, drops his clipboard, and runs from the hangar. When security personnel found him outside, Reeves was in a state of extreme distress. According to their report, he was pale, sweating profusely, and repeating the same phrase over and over, "She's still on the plane." When Reeves was finally calm enough to provide a coherent statement, what he described was beyond anything in his 30 years of aircraft investigation. "I was examining the circuit breaker panel when I heard her voice again," Reeves stated in his official report. "It wasn't crying this time. It was clearer. She said, 'Can you help me find my mommy?' I turned around and, I know how this sounds, I saw her. A little girl with dark hair, wearing a blue dress with white flowers. She was standing behind the captain's seat, partially transparent, like looking at someone through frosted glass." Reeves went on to describe how the girl appeared to be confused, repeatedly asking for her mother, and apparently unaware that she was in a crashed aircraft. "When I approached her, she became more solid, more present," his report continues. "She told me her name was Sophie and that she was supposed to be sitting next to her mommy, but a nice pilot man had invited her to see the cockpit before the flight took off. She said she was in the cockpit when everything went dark, and she'd been trying to find her way back to her seat ever since." What makes Reeves' account particularly compelling is that at the time of his experience, he had no knowledge of Sophie Laurent or the fact that a child had potentially been in the cockpit during the flight. The detail about the blue dress with white flowers was later confirmed by Sophie's father as the outfit his daughter had been wearing when she left for the airport with her mother. But there was something else in Reeves' report that chilled investigators to the bone. According to Reeves, Sophie told him she wasn't alone in the cockpit. "There are other people here too," she allegedly said. "They're stuck like me. They keep trying to make the plane work again." This statement took on horrifying significance when technicians entered the hangar the following morning and found something inexplicable. The standby instruments in the damaged cockpit were powered on. Despite having no power source, no battery connection, and being submerged in salt water for 2 years, the backup altitude indicator was operational. Even more disturbing, it was showing an altitude reading of 35,000 feet, the approximate cruising altitude of Flight 447 before it encountered problems. Officials immediately ordered a full technical examination of the cockpit. Engineers confirmed what should have been impossible. Several instruments were indeed receiving power from an unknown source. When they attempted to disconnect the instruments, several technicians reported receiving powerful electric shocks. One engineer, Marie Dubois, suffered third-degree burns on her hands when she touched the altitude indicator. It wasn't just electricity, Dubois later stated in a private interview. Electricity doesn't behave that way. The burn pattern on my hands, it looked like tiny handprints. The BA promptly quarantined the entire cockpit section and restricted access to essential personnel only. They brought in specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic fields and radiation levels. The readings were off the charts. The cockpit was emitting electromagnetic radiation at levels nearly 50 times higher than normal background radiation, yet concentrated specifically around the captain's seat and the area where the child had allegedly been seen. 3 days after Reeves' encounter, another investigator, Philippe Lacombe, reported a similar experience. While photographing damage patterns on the cockpit windows, Lacombe claimed to have seen the reflection of a young girl standing behind him. When he turned around, there was no one there, but his camera had captured something extraordinary, a blurry but recognizable image of what appears to be a child's face reflected in the cockpit glass. When shown this image, Sophie's father broke down in tears. "That's her," he said. "That's my Sophie." By this point, the investigation had split into two distinct tracks. The official examination of Flight 447's crash, which determined that a combination of technical failures and pilot error had caused the accident, and a classified investigation into the phenomena surrounding Sophie Laurent and the cockpit. This classified track took a dramatic turn when investigators made a connection that had been overlooked. Air France Flight 447 had been delayed in Rio for nearly 40 minutes before takeoff. According to the official flight log, this delay was attributed to routine maintenance checks, but internal documents revealed something different. The delay had been caused by a security incident involving an unauthorized person in the cockpit. The incident report was brief. Security had been called to remove someone who had entered the cockpit without permission during pre-flight preparations. The person was described as unidentified and was apparently never located by security personnel. The flight was cleared for departure after a thorough search of the aircraft yielded nothing unusual. Could this unidentified person have somehow been connected to what happened to Sophie Laurent? And more disturbingly, could they have been connected to the subsequent crash of Flight 447? The investigation took yet another unexpected turn when officials reviewed the cockpit voice recorder again, this time specifically listening for any sounds that might indicate the presence of a child. While the final moments of the flight remained the same, the pilots struggling to understand why the aircraft was not responding correctly, sound engineers discovered something in the background that had been previously missed. Approximately 7 minutes before the crash, during a moment when all three pilots were speaking simultaneously about the stall warnings, a faint voice can be heard saying what sounds like, "It's taking us home." The voice doesn't match any of the pilots. Sound analysis indicated it belonged to a child, approximately 5 to 8 years old. When this evidence was presented to the head of the investigation, Jean-Paul Tronchet, he made an unprecedented decision. He ordered a complete spiritual cleansing of the cockpit wreckage, bringing in religious representatives from various faiths to perform blessing rituals. This unusual step was never officially acknowledged in any public reports, but multiple sources confirmed it took place over 2 days in late June 2011. Following these rituals, the electromagnetic anomalies in the cockpit ceased. The powered instruments went dark. And perhaps most significantly, no further sightings of Sophie Laurent were reported. But the mystery of what happened to her remained unsolved. The official report on Flight 447 made no mention of Sophie Laurent or the phenomena experienced by the inspection team. It concluded that the crash was caused by a combination of inconsistent airspeed readings caused by iced-over pitot tubes, inappropriate pilot responses to these readings, and a high-altitude stall from which the crew could not recover. Nothing in this report addressed how a child could board an aircraft, apparently visit the cockpit, and then vanish without a trace. In 2017, 6 years after the recovery of the wreckage, Thomas Reeves broke his silence. Suffering from terminal cancer and with nothing to lose professionally, he provided a detailed account of his experience to a French journalist. His testimony included details that had never been made public, including his claim that Sophie had told him something that haunted him until his dying day. She said they weren't supposed to crash, Reeves revealed in his final interview. She said someone had changed their path to bring them here. When I asked who, she pointed to an empty space near the co-pilot seat and said, "The other man, the one who isn't a pilot. He touched the controls when no one was looking." Then she said something I'll never forget. "He's still doing it to other planes." Reeves died 3 weeks after this interview.
La publication qui avait recordé son témoignage mystérieusement lost l'audio files before they could be published. Le journaliste qui conduisait l'interview résigna shortly thereafter et déclina toute requête de discuter la matière fermante. En 2019, un anonyme source within the BAA leakta un partial dossier sur ce qu'avait commencé à s'appeler le Sophie Laurent Incident. Ce dossier révélait que dans les années following la récupération de Flight 447, la BAA avait quietly monitored reports from pilots and maintenance crews about children being heard or seen on aircraft that had previously experienced serious incidents or near misses. According to this dossier, between 2011 and 2019, there were 27 credible reports of maintenance crews hearing children's voices on empty aircraft during night shifts.
In 19 of these cases, the aircraft had previously experienced a near-catastrophic incident from which they had narrowly escaped. In each case, the voices were reported as asking for help or saying they were lost. Most disturbing of all was a pattern identified in the dossier. In 12 separate incidents involving commercial aircraft between 2012 and 2018, pilots reported momentary sightings of an unauthorized person in the cockpit shortly before experiencing unusual technical malfunctions. In each case, the person vanished when directly addressed, and subsequent security sweeps found no one on board who shouldn't have been there. The dossier concludes with a chilling recommendation. Consideration should be given to the possibility that what happened to Sophie Laurent represents not an isolated incident, but a previously undocumented phenomenon in aviation. If unidentified entities can somehow remain with an aircraft after a crash or serious incident, and if these entities can manifest in ways that affect the living, this represents a safety issue that cannot be addressed through conventional means. This dossier was quickly denounced as a hoax by aviation authorities worldwide. The BE issued a statement calling it fabricated nonsense designed to sensationalize a tragic accident. But privately, changes were implemented. Multiple sources confirmed that major airlines quietly added new security protocols requiring cockpit checks specifically during night maintenance operations. And several carriers instituted a policy requiring maintenance crews to work in pairs when examining cockpit areas. Perhaps most telling is what happened to the recovered cockpit section from Flight 447. Despite its potential value for training and safety research, it was not preserved as is customary with significant wreckage components. Instead, according to internal records, it was subjected to a complete material breakdown. Essentially, it was destroyed completely, reduced to unrecognizable components, and disposed of through multiple waste management systems. Sophie Laurent's father never accepted the official explanation that his daughter's remains were simply lost at sea. Until his death in 2016, he maintained a small foundation dedicated to investigating cases of children who seemingly vanished during flights, a phenomenon he claimed was more common than the public realizes. The Foundation's records indicate they had documented 7 similar cases across different airlines and countries between 1998 and 2015. The Foundation's work came to an abrupt end after his death, when a fire destroyed their offices and all their records. The fire was officially attributed to faulty wiring, though investigators noted that the destruction was unusually complete, with no recoverable documents or digital media. As for the cockpit voice recording containing the child's voice saying, "It's taking us home," it too has vanished. Former BEA officials claim it never existed in the first place. The engineers who discovered it have all either retired, changed careers, or refused to discuss the matter further. Today, if you inquire about Sophie Laurent at Air France or the BEA, you'll be told there is no record of a child by that name ever being on Flight 447. Her name has been completely expunged from all official passenger records. The only proof she ever existed at all comes from her father's testimony and a handful of photographs showing a smiling, dark-haired girl in a blue dress with white flowers, the same dress described by Thomas Reeves before he had ever seen a picture of Sophie. Perhaps most unsettling of all is a policy change that was quietly implemented by multiple airlines in the years following the Flight 447 investigation. Maintenance crews are now strictly prohibited from entering aircraft alone during night hours, particularly when the aircraft in question has previously experienced an unusual technical malfunction or near-miss incident. The official reason given for this policy is security protocol optimization. But maintenance workers have their own explanation. "Some planes remember what happened to them," said one longtime maintenance engineer who requested anonymity, "and sometimes they're not alone in there, especially the ones that should have crashed but didn't. We hear things at night, voices, usually children. They're lost, trying to find their way home, or maybe trying to warn us about something that's still on those planes, something that shouldn't be there." In 2023, a routine maintenance check on a 10-year-old Airbus A350 in Singapore was interrupted when both engineers reported hearing a child crying somewhere in the cockpit area. According to their report, when they called out, the crying stopped, replaced by a young voice that said clearly, "He won't let us land, the man who isn't supposed to be here." That aircraft had previously experienced an unexplained temporary loss of all electrical systems while cruising at 39,000 feet over the Indian Ocean in 2019. The pilots had managed to restart the systems and land safely, but no cause for the failure was ever determined. The aircraft was immediately taken out of service after the engineer's report. According to internal documents, during subsequent examinations, maintenance crews discovered numerous instances of what appeared to be deliberate but subtle tampering with critical systems, tampering that had somehow gone undetected during multiple previous inspections. The identity of who had accessed these systems remained undetermined. Security footage showed no unauthorized personnel entering the aircraft at any time. The tampering had occurred as if by an invisible hand. The aircraft never returned to service. Like the cockpit of Flight 447, it was completely dismantled, its components scattered across different waste management facilities. As a final note, I feel compelled to mention that during my investigation into this case, I've experienced some unusual incidents myself. 3 separate audio recordings of interviews I conducted with former Flight 447 investigation team members have been corrupted, despite being stored on multiple devices. Help us find the other man. Last week, while reviewing photographs of the Flight 447 cockpit wreckage late at night, I distinctly heard a child's voice behind me ask, "Are you going to tell them about the bad man?" When I turned around, my office was empty, but my chair, which I had been sitting in moments before, was spinning slowly, as if someone had just vacated it. I don't know what really happened to Sophie Laurent, or whether her presence somehow continues to echo through the aviation world. I don't know if there really was an other man in the cockpit of Flight 447, or if he's still doing it to other planes, as she allegedly told Thomas Reeves. But I do know this: experienced aviation professionals don't risk their careers by reporting things they don't believe they've genuinely seen or heard. And I know that somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of international aviation regulatory bodies, there exists a classified protocol for what to do when maintenance crews report hearing children's voices on empty aircraft. This protocol has a name, referenced only obliquely in leaked documents: Sophie contingency. If you ever find yourself alone on an aircraft during maintenance hours and hear a child crying, aviation authorities recommend that you immediately exit the aircraft and report the incident. Do not attempt to locate the source of the crying. Do not call out or ask questions. And most importantly, if you see anyone in the cockpit who wasn't there before, anyone at all, whether child or adult, do not approach them. Simply leave. Leave immediately. What would you do if you heard a child crying in an empty aircraft? Would you investigate, or would you heed the warnings and leave immediately?
Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more investigations into aviation incidents that the authorities don't want discussed in public forums.